The hearing room wasn't just tense. It was charged. Cameras rolled. Reporters whispered. And somewhere in the back, someone held their breath. Jasmine Crockett sat upright, eyes locked, jaw set. She'd waited patiently through hours of legalese and hollow declarations. But now it was her time to speak. Across the room, draped in the authority of the Supreme Court, sat Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Robe crisp, chin lifted, arms folded. He didn't blink, he didn't move, he didn't have to. Because power in rooms like these doesn't need to explain itself. Jasmine adjusted her mic, leaned slightly forward, and spoke the way she always did, with a voice that didn't tremble, and words that refused to be small. Let me be clear. What's on trial today isn't just a bill. It's not just another legal loophole dressed up like reform. What's on trial is the Constitution. What's on trial is the right to vote, to live, to breathe. Especially for Black and brown communities you seem to keep treating like footnotes. A hush fell. Even the rustling of paper stopped. Crockett wasn't reading from notes. She wasn't performing. She was prosecuting. Her gaze slid to Kavanaugh, not in fear, but with purpose. And that's when it happened. The smirk. A tiny lift of his mouth. Dismissive. Bored. Like she was a child talking too loud at a dinner table of men who already made up their minds. And then he laughed. Soft. Barely audible. But loud enough to cut through the marrow of the room. Jasmine stopped mid-sentence. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She just let the silence stretch. Long enough for everyone to feel it. Oh, you think this is funny? Her voice didn't rise. It dropped. Low, sharp, controlled like a loaded weapon in a locked room. Was it the part about families losing their vote? Or was it the part about Black children being purged from registration rolls like trash data on a spreadsheet? Kavanaugh's expression shifted, but not enough. Still smug. Still cloaked in his position. Jasmine leaned in again. Closer now. So close it felt like she was cutting across the oak table with her words. You laugh at me the way this system laughs at the people it fails. You laugh the way a king laughs at the peasants who dare ask for justice. The gallery was stone silent. Not even the coughs dared interrupt. She continued, "Let me remind you, I'm not here as a guest. I'm not here to entertain you. I'm here because I was elected to speak truth to men like you, men who sit in high chairs and forget they were meant to serve the people beneath them." Her eyes didn't leave his. And in that moment, a shift happened. Not just in the room, but in the nation watching. Something cracked. A wall. A pattern. An illusion of untouchable power. Jasmine didn't just confront a judge. She confronted a legacy of silence, the kind that let laughter echo louder than justice. As she sat back in her chair, a murmur passed through the chamber. But she didn't need applause. She wasn't playing for claps. She was building momentum. And this was only the beginning. The air hadn't moved in over a minute. No shuffling. No whispers. Not even a throat clear dared break the silence. The sound that finally pierced the stillness wasn't applause, it was a gavel. Bang. Bang. 3 sharp strikes from the chair. The presiding official, face flushed and voice trembling with decorum, spoke. The gentlewoman from Texas will yield her time and remain within the bounds of decorum. Jasmine didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't even glance away from Kavanaugh. She let the gavel ring like a warning shot. But this wasn't her first courtroom, and it sure wouldn't be her last. She slowly turned her mic back on. And in a voice colder than the marble floor beneath their shoes, she answered, "Decorum was lost the moment a Supreme Court justice laughed at voter suppression." Gasps. Real ones this time. Even from the aides typing notes on autopilot, Kavanaugh shifted. First time he moved in minutes. But Jasmine wasn't done. She never just came for a moment, she came for the narrative. We're told to speak respectfully. We're told to remain calm. But how calm were you, Justice Kavanaugh? When you yelled in your confirmation hearing about beer and high school memories, you could almost hear the oxygen evacuate the room. And now, a woman, a Black woman, a duly elected representative of the people calls out injustice, and suddenly you find your composure. She wasn't asking for permission. She was ripping the double standard out by its roots. Kavanaugh raised a hand slightly as if he might respond. But Jasmine cut him off, not with volume, but with precision. You can raise your hand all you want, but you don't get to raise your voice and silence mine. This bench doesn't make you untouchable, it just makes you visible. A reporter scribbled faster. A camera zoomed in on her face. You could see the fire in her eyes. The chair banged the gavel again. Bang, bang, bang. The gentlewoman will yield. Jasmine turned calmly, slowly, deliberately. "Mr. Chair, I will yield when I'm done doing the job the people sent me here to do." Applause broke out. Not from inside, that was still against the rules, but outside the hearing room, online, on phones and group chats across America, people started listening. Clips of her statement were already circulating. A single tweet read, "She's not yelling, she's testifying." Jasmine looked back at the room, a room built to intimidate. But she wasn't here to be intimidated. She was here to rewrite the rules of engagement. You don't get to laugh at injustice. You don't get to mock the voices fighting for those without one. And you sure as hell don't get to hide behind a robe while doing it. Kavanaugh sat still. But for the first time, he wasn't composed. He looked caught. Not because she had yelled she hadn't. Not because she'd broken rules she hadn't. Because she'd exposed him. With facts. With poise. With fire. As she yielded her time, Jasmine didn't lean back. She leaned in. "The gavel doesn't silence me. It only reminds me that some people have to be forced to listen." And with that, part 2 ended, but the room would not return to normal. It couldn't. Because the temperature had shifted. And everyone in that chamber knew Jasmine Crockett didn't just hold the floor, she owned it. She had yielded her time, but Jasmine Crockett had not yielded her power. There was no applause, no cheering, no slamming of fists on desks. Just a pause, heavy tense, like a thunderstorm sitting just above the Capitol dome. But Jasmine was not done, not even close. Because when you carry the truth, you do not walk away. You press forward. The room tried to reset, the chair tried to move on. Another representative cleared their throat, but no one heard them. Because the only thing echoing in the chamber was Jasmine Crockett's final line. "The gavel does not silence me." And she meant it. What came next was not noise. It was data. It was proof. It was what they never expect a black woman to bring into the room. Cold, sharp, irrefutable. She raised her hand again, not for attention, but to re-enter the battlefield. The chair hesitated, then nodded. He knew this was not over. Jasmine spoke again, even calmer than before. But every word carried voltage. "I brought receipts," she said. "So let us stop pretending we are debating opinions. Let us deal with facts." She reached into a thick manila folder, one tab at a time. She laid them on the table, page after page. Printed emails, court transcripts, voting reports, digital records of purges from voter rolls in communities that looked a lot like hers. There were names, districts, dates, all of it, undeniable. "This," she said, "is what I am fighting for, and this is what he laughed at." She did not name Kavanaugh again. She did not have to. Every eye was already back on him. "This is from Georgia," she said, "where 193,000 voters were wrongly flagged, purged with no notice. This is from Texas," she continued, "where precincts serving Black and Latino populations had lines 6 hours long, while white neighborhoods had walk-in voting." And here she held up one final paper, is a court filing. Kavanaugh voted to dismiss a case brought by a grandmother in Mississippi who was denied her ballot after voting in every election for 40 years. The silence in the room had changed. It was no longer uncomfortable, it was haunted. Because now there were names, there were faces, and they were all looking back through Jasmine's words. The chair cleared his throat, "Miss Crockett. Are you submitting these for the record?" She answered without turning her head. "I am submitting them. For the people who never get invited into this room." The chair hesitated, then nodded. Without objection, so ordered. Jasmine paused, and then she landed it. "You can dismiss me, you can ignore me, you can laugh if it makes you feel taller, but receipts do not care about your robe. Records do not bend to your opinion, and the consequences, well, they are already here." That sentence landed like a final blow. Not shouted, not screamed, delivered like a verdict. Even the court stenographer paused before typing the last word. Jasmine stacked her papers again. Neat, methodical, unapologetic. And as she leaned back, the message was clear. This was not emotion, this was evidence. And no amount of laughter could erase that. Judge Kavanaugh had not moved, not an inch, not a word. But something had shifted, not in his face, but in the air around him. Power has a way of folding in on itself when it is finally seen for what it is. And Jasmine Crockett, she had held up the mirror. Not a soft one, not a polished one, but a raw, cracked, unfiltered mirror. The kind that shows what power really looks like. When it forgets the people it is supposed to serve. She had not raised her voice. She had not broken decorum, but somehow she had become the loudest voice in the room. Because truth does not need volume, it just needs to be undeniable. The chair tried to move on, called the next speaker. But the shift had already happened. The witness who followed, a constitutional scholar, cleared his throat, shuffled his notes, and opened with the only words he could find. Representative Crockett, thank you for what you just said. And what you just showed us. The room nodded in silent agreement. Even the Republicans on the panel, those who had come prepared to discredit her, now looked down at their papers, unsure how to follow what had just happened. Jasmine did not gloat. She did not smile. Because this was not a performance. It was an exorcism of arrogance, of entitlement, of invisible cruelty. And the ghost being expelled was privilege, not the privilege of wealth, not even the privilege of position, but the most dangerous kind, the privilege of being able to laugh while someone else begs to be heard. Judge Kavanaugh adjusted his robe, a subtle motion, but it read like a confession, not in guilt, but in discomfort. The kind of discomfort that only comes when someone finally says what no one else dared. Because that laugh, it had been a reflex, a signal to dismiss, to delegitimize. But what came next was not silence, it was fire. Jasmine had become the moment, not because she wanted to, but because she refused to let the moment pass her by. She did not come to play nice. She came to remind them that power without accountability is not justice. It is tyranny in disguise. Social media exploded. Clips of her exchange were posted, edited, reposted, millions of views within hours. One user wrote, "This is what it looks like when truth walks into a room wearing heels and a congressional pin." Another, "She did not come to be liked, she came to be heard." Outside the chamber, reporters gathered. They no longer wanted quotes from the committee chair. They wanted Jasmine. Because the room may have gone back to protocol, but America was watching something very different. It was not just a political moment, it was a cultural one, a reckoning, where the old script had been torn in half. And for the first time, privilege looked into a mirror and did not like what it saw. As the session continued, Jasmine quietly reviewed her next set of notes. She was not done, not even close. Because the next round would not be about Kavanaugh, it would be about the system that built men like him, gave them robes, and never asked them who they feared and who they listened to. The battle was no longer personal, it was structural, and Jasmine was ready for it. Because once you hold up the mirror, the real question is not who laughed, but who will still stand. When the reflection shows them everything they tried to ignore. Jasmine Crockett did not come to patch cracks in the system, she came to expose them. And in this room, in this hearing, with a judge on one side and a gavel on the other, she was already breaking through the floor beneath their feet. Because this system was not just built on rules, it was built on silence, on nods behind closed doors, on dismissive glances, on the belief that some people are too loud, too angry, too different to ever be taken seriously. But today, that belief was under review. And Jasmine was leading the case. She sat there composed, sharp, radiating the kind of control that rattles those who think they own the room. And as the next witness droned on reading from pre-written statements, Jasmine did not hear the words. She saw the patterns. Same script, same excuses, different suit. Another man talking in circles, using big words. To explain why voter suppression is just a misunderstanding, not a strategy. And then it happened again. He looked at her and smiled, not with warmth, but with the kind of smile that says you should not be here. And that was the last spark Jasmine needed. She asked for her time. The chair hesitated, but handed it over. "Miss Crockett, you have 5 minutes." She only needed 2. She leaned in, locked eyes with the witness, and began. "Sir, do you believe every American should have equal access to the ballot box?" "Of course," he replied. "That is the foundation of our democracy." "Then why," she continued, "do your talking points treat voter roll purges like housekeeping instead of the erasure of constitutional rights?" He fumbled, adjusted his mic, and mumbled something about integrity and process. But Jasmine was not waiting for answers. She already knew them. She pulled out a map. Red pins, black pins, white pins. "Do you see this?" she asked. "This is where polling locations were closed last year. 90% of the closures happened in Black and Latino neighborhoods." Silence. She tapped the table once. "Do you know what that means? It means access to democracy is being decided by zip code and skin color." She paused, letting it hang, letting the weight settle. Then she said it. "They built this system to keep voices like mine out, but they forgot one thing. I am not just speaking. I am voting. I am legislating. And today I am prosecuting." That was the moment the room shifted again. Because Jasmine Crockett was not playing defense, she was on offense. and the system was no longer ready for her. The witness tried to respond, tried to defend the closures, blamed budgets, logistics, security. Jasmine cut through all of it. "Let me ask you," she said, "if your neighborhood lost power every election year, would you call that a coincidence or a strategy?" He said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. The chair interrupted. "Your time has expired." She looked at the chair and delivered the final line without raising her voice. "So has the excuse that this system is working for everyone." That was the blow. Not with fists, not with rage, but with a sentence so simple, so devastating, it cracked the marble under their arguments. She did not just expose the flaw in the system, she reminded everyone in that room that the floor they stand on is not solid, not safe, not sacred. Because once someone like Jasmine Crockett walks in, prepared, fearless, and unwilling to be dismissed, the system has two choices: adapt or break. And today, it started to break. He had held his silence long enough. Judge Kavanaugh was no stranger to controversy. He had sat through confirmation hearings that turned into national circuses. He had taken fire from senators, from journalists, from activists. But this felt different, because this time the courtroom was not just watching him, it was measuring him against someone he could not discredit, could not outmaneuver, could not silence. Jasmine Crockett. She had spent the last 2 hours building her case, not just against voter suppression, but against the very tone of the justice system itself. The smugness, the untouchable attitude, the belief that robes made people right. And Kavanaugh had laughed. A single laugh that would follow him for the rest of his career. So he finally spoke. He cleared his throat, straightened in his chair, and looked directly at her. "Representative Crockett, if I may, I would like to clarify that I did not intend my reaction to be interpreted as disrespect." She didn't move, didn't blink. She let him speak, because she wanted the world to hear what it sounds like when power tries to rewrite the moment after it backfires. "I respect this chamber," he continued. "I respect your passion, even if we disagree." That was it. That was his line, his lifeline. But Jasmine Crockett, she was not here for apologies wrapped in legal phrases. She responded, her voice even measured, but lethal. "You respect my passion. That is what you chose to say. Not my facts, not my argument, not the evidence I brought into this room. You called it passion, because it makes it easier to dismiss, to box me in as emotional, instead of effective." Kavanaugh shifted. The room froze again. She leaned slightly forward. "Let me be clear," she said, "I am not passionate, I am precise. And what you did earlier, whether you admit it or not, was an attempt to delegitimize a sitting member of Congress, because she dared to speak truth in your direction." There it was. The accusation, undeniable, public recorded. The judge lost his grip right then. He tried to speak, interrupted her. "Excuse me, Congresswoman. But she didn't stop. No. You excused yourself the moment you laughed. Now you can sit and listen. The way millions of people have had to sit and listen to a system that never sees them as equal. No shouting, no screaming, but the tension in her tone was enough to slice through the wood of the witness stand. That was when the chair banged the gavel again, desperate to regain control. "Order, order in this chamber. Both parties will refrain from personal accusations," but the room was already too far gone. Because this was not personal, this was historical, this was structural. And Jasmine was not making a scene, she was making a statement, one that had already been clipped, posted, shared, watched by millions who saw something they rarely see. A black woman, unshaken facing, one of the most powerful men in the country, and not backing down. As she finished speaking, Jasmine said the line that closed the door on the moment. "Disrespect is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, sometimes it hides behind a laugh. But I see it, and more importantly, so does everyone watching." She clicked off her mic. And that was the moment Judge Kavanaugh lost control of the narrative, not because he shouted, not because he lied, but because he underestimated the power of a woman who came to the courtroom, not to plead, but to prosecute. It started as a shift in posture, subtle, almost invisible, but you could feel it. One aide folded their arms, another lowered their eyes. Even the stenographer's fingers slowed. The room had turned against the robe, not because Jasmine Crockett shouted, she never did. Not because she insulted him, she never had, but because she told the truth. And everyone knew it. The robe was supposed to protect, to shield, to elevate those who wore it. But now it looked more like armor for arrogance. Because Kavanaugh was no longer just a judge on the bench. He was a symbol of how unchecked power reacts. when it finally gets held to the fire. And Jasmine Crockett, she brought the flame. What happened next was not explosive. It was worse. It was quiet. The kind of silence that screams judgment from colleagues, from staffers, from the very system that once rushed to protect him. Even members of his own party looked uncomfortable. You could see them inching back, careful, calculated, as if trying to step away from the shadow. Now forming behind him, Jasmine sat still. She did not smile, did not smirk. She did not need to, because her words were doing all the heavy lifting. And then, as if summoned by the shift, the media requests started flowing in. Producers outside the chamber whispered into phones, "Get her on tonight." She just went viral, because the country had just watched something rare, a moment where truth outshouted tradition, where a robe could no longer hide the man beneath it. And Jasmine was not done yet. She requested a point of order, not to grandstand, but to clarify one thing. "Mr. Chair," she said, "let the record reflect that I never once raised my voice, but I did raise a mirror." That was the moment. Even those who had tuned out earlier Saturday forward in their chairs, because the message was clear. This was not just about Kavanaugh. It was about a system that, for decades, for centuries, had been trained to protect power at all costs. Even when power failed, the people, Jasmine continued, "There are folks who think being calm means being correct, that being polite means being right. But I did not come here to beg for dignity. I came here to demand accountability." A thunderous silence followed, the kind where hearts beat louder than footsteps, the kind where nobody dares interrupt, because they all know history is being written. Right now, Kavanaugh stared ahead, his hands folded, but tighter now, tense, because what he feared most had already happened. She had taken away the shield of the robe, of the title, of the decades of unchallenged authority, and in its place she left him with only the words he could not undo. "You laughed, and the nation heard you." He could not erase it, could not out-argue it, could not hide from it, because the court of public opinion was now in session, and Jasmine Crockett was holding it in the palm of her hand, not out of ego, but out of necessity, because the truth was no longer whispering, it was roaring. And for once, the robe could not silence it. It took exactly 13 minutes, that was all. 13 minutes after Jasmine Crockett's final line, the internet erupted. Clips hit every platform. X, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, every corner of the internet lit up at once. Not because she yelled, but because she did not. Because she stood her ground, delivered her case, and looked one of the most powerful men in America in the eye, and said, "You do not get to laugh at us anymore." The first viral caption read, "She melted the robe without even raising her voice." The second, "Jasmine Crockett just taught a masterclass on power and precision." Then came the edits, side-by-side shots of Kavanaugh laughing, then Jasmine staring him down, then silence. No voiceover, no text, just the clip. Raw, uncut, and unforgettable. Even mainstream media could not ignore it anymore. CNN played the full exchange. Uninterrupted commentators sat stunned. MSNBC ran it on loop, with a headline that read, "The moment a representative became a reckoning." But the most powerful response did not come from anchors or pundits. It came from people. People who had never felt seen in these hearings. People who had been told to sit down, be quiet, wait their turn. Now they had a voice. And her name was Jasmine Crockett. One user wrote, "My grandma cried watching that, because she said that was her 50 years ago, only she was never allowed to speak." Another, "This clip is going into history books, not for what was said, but for what it finally ended." The silence. Jasmine herself said nothing. No victory lap, no interviews, no hashtags, because the moment was not about her, it was about something bigger. But the world was watching, and the system knew it. The backlash started too, as it always does. Commentators called her aggressive, unprofessional, too bold, too confident, too much. But their voices were drowned out by millions more who had seen the footage, heard the words, and felt the truth in their chest. Because what Jasmine Crockett had done was not just confront a man, it was confront a pattern of dehumanization, of power laughing while justice bleeds, of robes being used as shields instead of responsibilities. And she cracked it, clean down the middle. That night, late shows covered it. Activists organized under it. Young women of color reposted it with tears and fists raised, saying, "Finally someone said it." And not just said it in the room where it mattered most. By morning, major papers ran headlines, "The laugh that backfired when a justice met his match," and "Jasmine Crockett and the end of untouchable power." But Jasmine did not gloat. did not reply. She went to work, as she always did, because she knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of a new way power would be held accountable, not by yelling, not by violence, but by truth carried in calm, delivered without apology, and heard by millions. That was how legacy starts. Not in fire, but in clarity, not in chaos, but in composure. And Jasmine Crockett had just redefined what power looks like when it stands on the side of justice. Systems do not like to be exposed. They are built to absorb criticism, to outlast outrage, to bury the noise under process and procedure. But what Jasmine Crockett unleashed was not noise. It was a crack, a fracture in the foundation. And now the system had to respond. It started with the press releases. Carefully worded, distant, meant to sound neutral, without being accountable. Several members of the Judiciary Committee issued statements, calling for a review of protocol, a reminder of courtroom decorum, a general sense that things had become too emotional. But no one mentioned the laugh. No one mentioned the disrespect. No one dared to name the imbalance that had been caught on camera, played, replayed, and dissected by millions. Because once the public saw it, they could not unsee it. The laughter from a judge, the composure of a congresswoman, and the undeniable power of her words, that was not emotional, that was unforgettable. Some lawmakers behind closed doors began whispering about investigations ethics questions. Whether Kavanaugh's behavior on the bench reflected the dignity of the court, it was not formal, not yet, but it was real, because the court of public opinion had shifted and pressure was building. Advocacy groups responded next. Statements poured in from civil rights organizations, from legal watchdogs, from voter protection alliances. One read, "The balance of power means nothing. If the people in power treat accountability like a punchline." Another, "When a judge laughs at democracy, the people must respond with votes, and voices louder than any gavel." Protests were planned, not angry mobs but silent walks, with people dressed in black, holding signs with Jasmine's final line, "Disrespect is not always loud." It was not just a moment anymore, it was a movement, and the system could no longer pretend it had not heard her. Inside the chambers, the tone shifted. Colleagues who once rolled their eyes now sat straighter when she spoke. Opponents who used to interrupt now paused, careful, calculating, because Jasmine was not just a representative now, she was a reckoning. And the judge, Judge Brett Kavanaugh, remained silent. No interviews, no clarifications, no further laughter, because he knew there was no defense for the footage. The system around him was trying to protect its own. But even it could feel the ground shifting beneath its feet. Journalists began digging old hearings, old footage, old statements, looking for a pattern, looking for the cracks. Jasmine had started to reveal. What they found would come later. But for now, the narrative was no longer his. It belonged to the woman who had turned a chamber upside down with nothing but truth, and the courage to say it out loud. Jasmine remained calm through it all. She issued no statements, did no interviews. She let the country speak for her, because she knew. This fight was never just about one man. It was about the structure that protects men like him. And if that structure was finally trembling, then her voice had done more than make noise. It had moved the earth. There was no formal ruling, no gavel strike, no written opinion from the court. But everyone who watched, everyone who listened, everyone who felt that moment unfold, knew what had just happened. The verdict was already in. Jasmine Crockett had stood up, not for a party, not for applause, but for something far more dangerous, more powerful, more lasting. The truth. She had looked a Supreme Court justice in the eye and said what most people only dare whisper, that power, when unchallenged, turns into poison. And that day, she delivered the antidote. But this was not just about Kavanaugh. It never was. This was about the system, the culture, the generational conditioning that teaches people like him that laughing at a black woman is harmless, that rolling your eyes at her facts is not disrespect, but routine. And Jasmine shattered that routine without raising her voice, without standing on a desk, without storming out. She prosecuted arrogance with composure. She shamed power with evidence. She made history by refusing to shrink, and the world saw it happen. In real time, millions watched, not because they were looking for drama, but because they saw something different. A courtroom where the truth was not on the bench, but at the witness table wrapped in calm and fire and facts. For days, the clip continued to spread. Universities used it in political science courses. Activists quoted it in rallies. Parents showed it to their daughters. And quietly, Some of the very people who once ignored her began to listen. The hearing faded. As hearings always do, the news cycle moved on as it always does. But the moment remained. It became something bigger than itself. It became a new standard. Not just for how to speak truth to power, but how to become the power and still answer to the people. Jasmine Crockett returned to her office. Stacks of mail, hundreds of messages, thousands of new eyes, watching her every word. She welcomed it, not for ego but for purpose, because she knew her voice was never just hers. It belonged to the people who had never been invited into the room. Now they were in the room because she brought them in, word by word, sentence by sentence. And as for Kavanaugh, he said nothing, no apology, no rebuttal, no press tour to reclaim the moment. Because deep down he knew, this time the robe did not protect him, the institution did not insulate him, and the silence that followed was not grace, it was judgment. From the people, from history, from the truth, he tried to laugh away. Jasmine Crockett did not win a case that day. She did not pass a bill or write a new law. But she did something rarer, something harder, something unforgettable. She delivered a verdict that never had to be spoken, because the whole world already knew what it was. And long after the cameras stopped, after the headlines faded, after the critics moved on to their next target, her words remained. Disrespect is not always loud, but justice does not have to be either. And with that, Jasmine Crockett did not just make history, she rewrote it.